Welcome back to Radical and Relevant, where we're exploring the genius of Jesus in the Gospels. Today's reading is from John chapter 19, verses 25 through 34. So the soldiers did this, but standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing near, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." And then he said to the disciple, "Behold your mother." And from that hour, the disciple took her into his own home. After this, Jesus, knowing all that was now finished, said, to fulfill the scripture, "I thirst." A bowl full of vinegar stood there. So they put a sponge full of the vinegar on hyssop and held it to his mouth. When Jesus had received the vinegar, he said, "It is finished." And he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Since it was the day of preparation, in order to prevent the bodies from remaining on the cross on the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a high day, the Jews asked Pilate that their legs might be broken and that they might be taken away. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first and the other who had been crucified with Jesus. But when they came to Jesus, they saw he was already dead. They did not break his legs. But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once there came out blood and water. Is there a word or a phrase or an idea that jumps out at you today? What jumps out at me is this interaction between Jesus and Mary and John. And then it says, and from that hour, the disciple took her to his own home. From that hour, John took Mary to his own home. John took Mary and took care of her. Have you taken Mary into your own home? What place does Mary have in your own home? And what place does Mary have in your heart? And is it time to renew the place you have for Mary in your home? Is it time for us to renew the place that Mary has in our hearts? Have a great day. Remember, be bold, be Catholic. I was at dinner many years ago. Was about to speak in a parish, and there were a bunch of people at the dinner, and I heard out of sort of just peripheral, the priest say at the head of the table, "You can become a saint just by governing your speech." And I was engaged in another conversation at the moment, but I heard him say it. I'll say it again. You can become a saint just by governing your speech. And I said to the person who was next to me, I said, "Can we just pause that conversation for a minute?" And then I turned to the priest and I said, Can you say what you said again? And he said it again. He said, "You can become a saint just by governing your speech." And I became curious. I'm like, okay, you got to talk to me about this. And then he began to talk about a section in the book of James, where James talks about how the tongue directs our lives. It talks about how our speech impacts our lives positively or negatively. He talks about how, the tongue is just a tiny piece of the body, but it can direct our whole lives. He talks about how a rudder is a tiny piece of a boat, but it can control a massive vessel, direct a massive vessel. He talks about how, just by putting a little bit in the mouth of an enormous horse, you can direct that horse wherever it is you want that horse to go. And so the conversation went on, and it was just so convincing. It was so compelling. I have wanted to write this book for at least 20 years. And it's The Forgotten Way, the St. James Master Plan. The Forgotten Way, the St. James Master Plan. If you haven't got a copy, I encourage you to pick a copy up. I think it might be the most challenging thing I've ever written. And I start the book with a warning. I start the book by saying, you are standing on the threshold of a new frontier. If you are not open to undertaking substantial spiritual growth, you should put this book down right now. Walk away. Some things, once seen, cannot be unseen. There are things that once heard cannot be unheard. You will not be able to unsee what we are about to discover. You will not be able to unhear the things I'm going to whisper in your ear. The promise of this book is very simple. You can transform your life by changing the way you speak. The Forgotten Way, the St. James Master Plan. Hope you pick up a copy today. God bless you, and remember, be bold, be Catholic.